Welcome back to Nightly Nonsense, where we make some sense out of the nonsense all around. But on this end of the world, end times, right? Chat for the last week, trying to challenge you, brother. Not all the details. Not going to tell you what pestilence is coming. Not going to tell you what the locusts are going to look like. Not going to tell you when the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, and all the things are going to happen. We're not even talking about any of that. We're talking about the broader picture that a bunch of nonsense is about to come your way. You got to decide whether you believe that, first of all. You got to decide, right, that you're not worthy of anything, but that God thinks you're worth it. But that worth it, right, doesn't mean that you're going to get out of jail free, right? That there are things that probably are coming your way. You need to decide that and act like that. Last night we talked about the fact that, listen, what happens when Jesus says, not me, that the love of many is going to grow cold, right? I want to talk specifically for just a few minutes on one of the parts that scares me the most as a pastor, as a church leader. It scares for my own life and everybody else's life, right? There are lots of things that people like to argue about. When it comes to abortion, for years and years and years, I have maintained a pretty strong stance, right? I am adamantly against abortion, right? Adamantly against it. But I don't give this universal, I'm always going to be against, I would never choose abortion stuff because of one fact. Listen carefully to me. I've never been faced with having to make the choice between somebody I really love, right? And a child, right? Nobody came to me ever and said, Andy, you have to choose between your wife and your son. Nobody, ever. Right? But there are people every day that are forced with that choice. They are forced with a doctor coming and saying, listen, we can save your child or we can save your wife. And it is really easy for you and I to stand back and go, you just got to have faith and just say, oh, God will deal with it. You know what? Lots of people have had that faith and their wife has died. The child has died. God has chosen to do that. Right? So don't be quick to judge. Do I believe that that's truth in that case? Absolutely. You need to be prepared to say, listen, I'm going to rely on God no matter what. But don't be pointing that out if you've never had to make that choice. It's really simple for you to say that. It's the same thing when we get to the end times. The Bible tells us that people are going to stand in front of other people. I don't know what that looks like, right? We throw guillotines in there. That's great. I love medieval stuff. So it's a great visual. We throw guillotines in there and say, listen, they're going to put a guillotine in front of Tops Market, right? And they're going to say, you can come in and buy stuff if you denounce Jesus. And oh, by the way, if you denounce Jesus, that's great. Go in there and you can have whatever you want. But if you don't denounce Jesus, we're not going to let you get in your car and just drive away. We're going to take your head off right here, right? So again, I've never been faced with the choice of having to choose between my family, right, and my life. I've never, ever had to choose that. I've made tough decisions in life. I've had to choose my family over certain things. I've chosen other things over my family. I've had to choose godly things over all things, right, before. That's a little bit easier, right, than these cases. Imagine standing in a moment, somebody standing in front of you and saying, it's really simple. Denounce Jesus, feed your family, right? Live for another day. Or stick to Jesus, lose your head. Oh, by the way, we're probably going to kill the rest of your family anyway. Thank you for playing. Imagine that moment. If you're listening to me, imagine that moment. Because all the theology that you have, it's not going to help. All the things that you're trying to remember that your pastor told you, your Sunday school teacher told you, that your small group leader told you, all the things that you read on Facebook, all the things that you have hanging in your house, right? None of those things in that moment are going to help you. You know what's going to help you? A real, bona fide, solid relationship with Jesus Christ. And the Holy Spirit in that moment coming on you with peace. Guess what? Stephen stood up in front of people. He did not denounce Jesus. He absolutely pronounced Jesus. And guess what happened to him at the end? Stoned. And you know what he had the ability to do because the Holy Spirit was on him in an important, impressive way? He had the ability to look at his accusers, his stoners, and say to them, I forgive you. God forgive them, for they know not what they do. He quoted Jesus. So let me ask you, can you do that? Can you not only take a guillotine for Jesus, but while you're sitting there with your head in place, do you have the ability to say, forgive them? Forgive them, Jesus. Because again, if you don't forgive them, you're going to heaven with unforgiveness. We could talk about that all day, right? You can have an argument with me, but you have to forgive people. So are you prepared to do that? Not just make a stand for Jesus, lose your life for Jesus, and forgive for Jesus. We don't talk about the last part of that whole thing, which is forgiveness. We talk about martyrdom and would you give your life for Jesus? But are you ready to forgive those people who take your life? What if God gives you a second to say something? Would you do it? Would you say, hey, I forgive you? Right? Would you? Is your faith strong enough to stand up for Jesus? Not sit down for Jesus, not walk away. And if you think that you're going to denounce it, here's how the enemy works this, right? If you denounce Jesus, you take this mark. If you take the mark, you're not going to ever be in relationship with God again, because it's the mark that says you denounced Jesus. It's the mark that says you chose him over Jesus. Do you know that the enemy has been attempting that his entire existence? Getting people to choose him over Jesus. So, think about that. Tons on this Friday night. It's super lot to think about. Super exciting to think about. Right? It's not. But you better be ready for it. And somebody needs to tell you to be ready for it. So if you choose to believe that, hey, this is a possibility, I might have to do this, you might want to tell some other people that, hey, you might have to be ready for this. It's not enough to just say, I know Jesus. Man, in that moment, you actually have to be Jesus. Jesus took a scourging, mocking, spitting, smoting, and a cross, and a bunch of other stuff for you. And at the end of it, you know what he said? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they did. Think about that. See you next time. Day in the Nonsense.